Welcome, Douglas County. I'm Kelly Robinson, Commissioner of the 2nd District and Vice Chairman of the Board of Commissioners. And you're here live for District Dialogue. Again, I've got a very special guest that we're going to talk about here, a topic that's dear to my heart. When this airs, it'll be May of 2021. May is what they call Mental Illness Month in the state of Georgia and nationally. So we're going to talk about mental health, but specifically around children. So with that being said, I'm going to come right back in a few moments and I'm going to introduce my special guest, and we're going to get into a topic that we want to bring awareness to. Stay tuned. Welcome back, Douglas County. Again, Commissioner Kelly Robinson here, and I've got a very special guest. Judge, how are you?
I'm wonderful.
Welcome
Thank you.
aboard.
Thank you for having me.
Judge Harrison's here from our juvenile court system.
That's correct.
And we really appreciate you being here. And so we were just talking right before we got started about sort of the topics and how we wanted to approach this. But before we even get started, so if you don't mind, Judge, introduce everybody, what do you do, what's a judge, and how the juvenile system works, and then we'll get into the deeper topics.
That's a pretty loaded question.
Yes.
About how the court system works. So I was recently appointed to my position in 2020.
Yes, you were. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
And before that, I served as associate judge with Judge Peggy Walker.
Yes.
So I came on the bench right when COVID decided to take over. So not only did I have a whole bunch of cases to address that were left from my predecessor, but then to move into a virtual setting was for everybody very difficult. But I will say that at our juvenile court, as well as all of the juvenile courts throughout the state, we're able to not incur the same backlog that we're seeing in some of the other courts. Part of that is just the luck of the nature. We don't have jury trials, so we didn't have to have that delay in moving forward. As soon as we learned how to go virtual, we were able to quickly jump into that mode, and I think by June we were caught up with our backlog, so we really didn't have any backlog moving forward. Our court system at juvenile court handles various cases. We have what we call the juvenile justice, where we're looking at youth and them making some bad choices and ending up before the court. And we also cover the child welfare arena, which addresses children who have alleged to have been abused and neglected. We have a variety of other issues that come under our jurisdiction, but those are the two main areas that we work with. And what we do see while we're talking about mental health is an extraordinary number of youth and adults who end up in the system due to untreated mental health issues.
So you bring up, so there's what I heard, a statistic is roughly a couple million people in Georgia that suffer from mental illness, which is adults, and about 85,000 for juveniles or youth. How many people in Douglas County are affected? Do you know roughly? How does that? I mean, how do you size this? How deep does the rabbit hole go? Well,
this is a pretty scary statistic, but essentially 1 in every 3 children have some sort of mental health diagnosed or could have a mental health diagnosis. It may be untreated. They may never recognize that they have mental health issues. Someone in the community, family, schools, they might not ever recognize that this child or youth has a mental health issue.
Is it unrecognizable or undiagnosed? Undiagnosed. I mean, what do you?
Well, I think it's both.
Yeah. Okay.
I think families who come under the jurisdiction of juvenile court don't understand mental illness or mental health. We can't see it. We can't feel it like a broken arm.
Right.
And if you don't understand the importance of mental health, if you don't understand mental illness, it's hard to recognize when someone has an issue. Depression is probably one of the easiest things for you to internalize and for someone externally to recognize, that person looks a little off. But it's very easy to say, they're just going through a situation, they'll move beyond that. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And unfortunately, with a statistic of 1 in 3, there's a lot to be addressed.
So that's 33%. So here we are, they're out there as youth. So what is it to come in front of the juvenile court? I mean, to come before you, how do I have to be? What's your age range when I have to come before you?
So in the child welfare arena, we deal with children from the day they're born until they turn 18.
Okay.
That's our jurisdictional limit. Sometimes if we have families court involved and the parents end up getting pregnant again while they're court involved, then we may also assist while the child is still in vitro. But they don't really actually come under the jurisdiction until they're born. In the juvenile justice arena, we deal with youth. Essentially, we've had children as young as 5 and 6,
right,
up to age 17 or 16, almost 17. 17, you are if you get in trouble with the law, you're treated as an adult in the state of Georgia.
What's that age again?
17.
17. It is 17.
Not
Okay.
18.
Right.
There is a strong push right now through the legislature to raise it to 18. We are one of 3 states remaining that have our juvenile justice jurisdiction below the age of 18.
So we come before you if, in fact, our behavior is such that it's non-conforming. And so are there degrees? I mean, how does it work? And let's just say I find something like really it wasn't bad behavior in the sense of intent. It's a mental. How do you separate it? Like, how do we now, do you want to go to home or you want to go to jail? Is there a mental health court, accountability court for children? I mean, is there any other type of alternative sentencing? I mean, how do you deal with this?
So there's a lot of ways that we deal with it. Most significantly, though, that you mentioned accountability court. So we do have a family treatment court, which deals with substance abuse in adults whose children are either in foster care or at risk of going into foster care. And within that substance abuse treatment, we also address mental health.
Okay.
In regard to our youth, we are looking into and beginning the process of starting a juvenile mental health court here.
Okay. Right. Okay.
So we, our county has a big buy-in for accountability courts.
Yes.
We have several of them. This is just another stepping stone in that direction to help where we can help as opposed to just punishing. One thing that I have learned from day one is that a youth's brain is not fully developed until 25 or 26.
Okay.
And the last part of the brain to develop is the frontal lobe,
Right.
which is the decision-making part.
Right.
Impulsivity seems to be, key for young people who don't think about what are the consequences if I engage in this behavior. And so we have really shifted the focus from, treating juveniles like little adults to recognizing that they don't have the development. And there's usually a lot more to it that's brought them into the juvenile justice system.
Of course. Right. It's never one thing. So if you can distinguish now, you have the school system that has its own jurisdiction. And how do you separate the two? Does the school send them right over to you, or how does that work when behavior breaks down?
So with the new school system that we have in the county, they have really taken a very strong approach of trying to deal with minimal rule-breaking behavior internally.
Okay.
And so I think in a lot of respects they are trying to be trauma-informed, trauma-focused, so that they can understand sometimes kids come in and break the rules because there's something worse going on at home or inside of them or some sort of traumatic event that's causing them to make a poor decision.
Right.
So we are not seeing a lot of those kids work their way into the juvenile justice system because the schools are doing a fabulous job trying to intervene and assist where they can. We in juvenile court also, I mean, our goal is to go out of business. You know, we want to keep children from coming into court because court in and of itself is a traumatic event. So we do have some diversion programs. We do have processes that we try to utilize to address helping the child and the family and address those mental health needs before they even step foot in the court.
And so you try to be preventative, or
Yes.
I mean, can we when you say diversion, preventative, because at some point I'm probably already in trouble, but you try to come up with some type of alternative way of dealing with it.
Yes.
To try to cure the issue.
Yes.
Or remedy.
Right.
Okay. So when we talk about children and the mental health, and let's talk pandemic. All right. So let's say normal society, and then you overlay that. Is it true that what parents go through, it trickles down to the children to a certain extent? And did you see a shift in children's behavior during the pandemic?
Yes.
Okay.
One thing I can say is that it has been evidentially proven that some trauma and mental health is hereditary. So even being raised in the perfect world, if you genetically are predisposed to having a mental illness or mental health issues or lack of mental health development, you have the possibility of following in those footsteps. And so that is one area that, you know, we try to recognize, is that sometimes when a parent has mental health issues, there's a good possibility that the child's going to as well. And so we try to provide the services that we have available in the community to families to try to help them address those issues. The first step is being aware of what those issues are. Right. If you're not aware of them, you're not going to seek help and you're not going to seek change.
We talked about hereditary. Mm-hmm. And so, again, it's easy to talk about, you know, the physical part. My arm is broken. I can talk about that. I've got glaucoma, and my father had it. So it's like, oh, you know, I found out later in life, well, that would have been nice to know, Dad. I mean, you know, it's just like I'm 20 years into it, like, okay, well, I thought you get it, right? So it's good to know your history. But you talked about mentally. I hadn't heard that perhaps, so if there's schizophrenia or some other type of mental illness, the Big Ten as they call them, that can be passed down. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, it can. A lot of mental illnesses are also chemical imbalances in your brain. And I'm not professing to be, you know, a doctor or scientist, but these are all the things that I've learned throughout the years sitting as a juvenile court judge and in our training. You know, if your brain's not wired right, you're going to have effects in life. Okay. You may have them early in life. They may not show until later in life. Okay. And if you have a parent who suffers from depression, that lack of wiring or the lack of appropriate neurons and electrons talking to each other to avoid that chemical imbalance, that can be passed down. Interesting.
When you talk about like depression, there could be something that happens. You go from 2 income to 1 income to no income, right? You're in a depressed state, that dark space, right? And what I'm hearing you say is that the children could also, later in life, they can have a similar exposure and they will go into depression. I mean, I'm just curious because as our citizens are listening to this and they're sort of relating to the topic, how can we help them process what they're looking at? I know.
Mental illness issues can also be, cyclical. I mean, they can be, situational. Mm-hmm. So they're not always going to be something that is long-term or right. through your lifetime. And, right. and in those kinds of scenarios, including with COVID, and being sheltered away from having access to anything, mm-hmm. It can trickle down. Not just from just listening to your parents be upset or complain about the situation that they're in, but the isolation in and of itself can create those issues for our youth.
I understand. Now, and I guess to that next point, so as they come before you in court, like how would you silo the types of instances people come before you? Like how would you categorize the buckets? Stealing, I mean, how do you categorize your world?
Okay, so so it used to be that the law allowed for certain crimes that only a child could commit,
Okay.
that an adult couldn't, were treated one way, and those were called status offenses.
All right.
Those are your truancy, your runaway, unruly, ungovernable behaviors. Those were treated in a manner that was probably more punishment oriented than what we are trying to do now.
Okay.
In 2014, we had a total rewrite of the Juvenile Code, and one of the things that was rewritten was how to treat those status offenses. We found that that kind of behavior usually was more of something is not just the child getting in trouble. There's something going on, in the home environment or in the school environment that needs some attention so that these youth don't fall into the cyclical nature of ending up in juvenile court and eventually ending up in adult court and prison. And so we've learned that is sort of where we want to focus our attention toward, to try to front end helping where we can help so that we're not helping when things get really bad, and acting reactionary as opposed to preventative.
Great. And when you say, I'm glad you shared that information, because some of the things that we get questioned sometimes is understanding the difference between the different courts. But specifically when we push into the mental health, and again, it's unrecognizable sometimes, and it's a slow walk. And what it sounds like we're doing is we're just now making awareness. Like later this month, I'm going to have a forum which I'm going to be talking about children's mental health and bringing providers, service providers, other people to the table to go a little bit deeper than this show will allow. But if there's something that you want to share with the citizens that they can look out for, are there some signs that they need to be looking at? I mean, from your wisdom, from your place of sitting on the bench, you see a lot, and it's after the fact. And if you could offer them something as far as signs to look at this, what would you share with the citizens?
I think it's important to understand that children sometimes make choices that are reactionary to the environment that they have been raised in, that they've come to know, and that it's not always this child is just wanting to be a delinquent child. This child just isn't listening. This child knows right from wrong, and they should know better than to make those choices that get them in trouble. I hear that all the time in court. And then I say, well, let's look a little bit further back. What has happened to this child that may be a traumatic event? Has there been, a killing that they've observed? Has there been poverty that they've been part of? Has there been a divorce? I mean, all of those things can trigger a traumatic event. And the more adverse trauma a child experiences in their lifetime developing, the more likely they are to end up in having difficulties and having mental health issues. And I think if we would all come to understand that not always are children actually choosing to break the law, but that there's a lot more to it that requires delving into and having someone who is educated and is a professional in the area of dealing with trauma, providing that trauma-focused therapeutic environment. We might have some improvements. Right. There's always going to be bad acts. There's always going to be youth who are at the cusp of the 16, 17-year-old, sometimes 15, that get involved with the wrong crowd. Right. They don't have sufficient supervision, so they cling to people who will give them attention. And, they end up doing some pretty serious things that need to have serious consequences. But chances are, if we look back and delve deep into how this child came to be, we're going to find a lot of traumatic events, family mental health issues, family violence, all kinds of things that can explain why someone may do what they're doing.
So I got a different question for you. I'm just going to piggyback on something. You talked about resources in the community. Is there anything that you can make available to the public, bring them aware of? If there's any tool out there that you can share to people without making recommendations hard, you know, I understand you're a judge, but if there's something that you think that's available for the citizens that they can access, can you share it now, Judge?
Yes, so I can make a great plug for both court and for juvenile programs, which is a division of Juvenile Court. We have on our website, if you go to the celebratedouglas.com and go to Juvenile Court or Juvenile Programs, there is a link to our resource guide. It's a very lengthy document, but it is filled with every known resource to help address mental health, substance abuse, domestic violence, any sort of issue that would otherwise be a court-related matter. You can go to that resource guide and find references, phone numbers, addresses to agencies that are here in the community. They may or may not work with juvenile court, but they are here, present in our community, and accessible to folks to get to.
That's great. So at the end of this taping, you'll see on the screen access in the website for this resource guide that we're talking about called Things Link.
Yes.
And so we'll make that available to you at the end of this program. So Judge, is there anything else you'd like to share with the citizens about the new program that you're bringing online? Because again, you've been 1 year in and we're about to rev back here, but what's your vision though? What's your future then for the juvenile system? I know Judge Walker retired out and you now the baton was passed, so where are you taking us now?
I'm really hoping that the community will come to understand that juveniles, our youth, we have to look at them differently than the way that we look at the adults and the adult system. Our system is not meant to be a punishment oriented provider. Our goal is to treat and rehabilitate our youth so that they can learn the right ways to function and be a proactive citizen of our community. We don't want to just push children, through the pipeline so that they end up in prison. That's not our goal. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't have any other option than that. But part of it is awareness to the community. Part of it is an understanding of the community that mental health affects all of us in some form or fashion. And it is a very important topic that has to be talked about, has to be understood, and has to be accepted. Again, going back to you can't see a mental health injury like you can a physical health injury. And the stigma that comes along with mental health and mental illness has always been so negative. And I think we could all end up a lot better off if we had a better understanding of the importance of keeping your mental health healthy.
In our closing comments, for this month will be the 2006 year in which we've promoted mental health awareness, and we obviously it's tied to behavioral health and everything. But to your point, there's still that stigma. We're just now talking about it, but at some point you got to begin to take action. It's okay to get help.
Yes.
Everybody got issues.
Yes.
We all have issues, but different degrees. But we've got to seek the help. I mean, we get the eyes checked, the teeth checked, your physical, your medical check. But what about the mind?
Right.
We got to bring that to the forefront because again, I understand it's more room for the physical to give reasonable accommodations, but when the mind is off. There's a pause on that. So as society, we've got to advance that. But it's people like yourself that understand it, that you're helping us shape policy that allows those things to come into play and stuff. And obviously my side is to help fund those things that are necessary. So I'm excited about your juvenile mental health court that's coming online. I look forward to talking to you later this year about that. Judge Harrison, thank you so much for coming out, citizens. This is Judge Harrison. We appreciate her being here at the beginning of her career on the bench. My name is Kelly Robinson. And again, this is Mental Illness Month awareness for Douglas County, in Georgia and throughout the nation. Stay tuned for closing comments. Welcome back, Douglas County. Again, I'm Kelly Robinson, Commissioner of the 2nd District and Vice Chairman of the Board of Commissioners. We had a very good show with Judge Harrison talking about mental health. And we were just talking as we were closing that, we recognize everybody has issues, but it's okay to get help. We need to move beyond just the awareness of physical, the things we deal with our eyes, the things we deal with our teeth and our medical. We all have that type of insurance, but we need to move to a place where we embrace the need and accept the personal responsibility to go get help. It shouldn't be dictated to you. It's one of those things where you come into your own awareness that I need to get help. So citizens, we ask you to go ahead and take that charge, go out there and seek the help that you may need. There are resources that are available, and we'll continue to make those available to you through our Community Service Board, through our website, celebratedouglascounty.com, and anything else that we may come up with. With that being said, again, thank you and good evening from Douglas County.